Hello, everyone, and hello from Malaysia. Welcome to our AIMST Biotechnology Students Association webinar series. Thank you very much for your participation today. You have joined our webinar on connecting culture, food, and the environment on global sustainability. We will begin our program shortly. I'd like to kick off today's program by reminding you on some of the housekeeping items as seen on screen. First of all, please turn off your microphone during the session and only unmute when required to speak. Please turn on your camera so we'll be able to see each other. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to message us through the chat box. We'll try our best to address your concerns. The chat box is also there for you to introduce yourself, so please give us your name, where you're from, and your organization. Last but not least, no phone calls or disruptions during the session. Note that this session will be recorded and live streaming is done through YouTube. The recording will be saved on our YouTube channel right after the session. An evaluation survey will appear at the end of our session. Please spend a few minutes to give us your feedback, as it will really be helpful for us to improve on our next session. Thank you very much for your attention, and once again, welcome all to our webinar organized by AIMST Biotechnology Students Association. My name is Saitisha, and I'm proud to tell you that I'm a BSc Honors Biotechnology degree program student of AIMST University. It is a great honor for me to serve as the MC of today's webinar. If anyone has any issues with the audio or video, please use the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. To start the session, I would like to invite Ms. Vivian, the ABSA Vice President, to deliver her welcoming remarks.
Thank you, MC, Ms. Saitisha. Hello, everyone, and greetings from Malaysia. Our honorable speaker of the day, Professor Dr. Shonyo Bhagwat, Professor of Environment and Development, who is also heading School of Social Sciences and Global Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, the Open University, United Kingdom. Senior Professor M. Ravichandran, Dean of Faculty of Applied Sciences, AIMST University, our AIMST Biotechnology Students Association Advisor, Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash, professors, lecturers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. On behalf of the AIMST Biotechnology Students Association, I welcome you all. I'm very delighted to see all of you here, though it is virtually. I'm pleased to know that we have more than 700 registered participants from 21 different countries. We have participants from Afghanistan, Algeria, Australia, Bangladesh, Cyprus, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Japan, Kyrgyzstan, Libya, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, South Korea, Sri Lanka, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. This is our 7th webinar as a part of our ABSA webinar series. As an association of students, ABSA always strives to provide a quality and comprehensive social platform to our biotechnology and bioinformatics students of AIMST University. We help them to learn new things, to grow, and to have fun in the process. We had organized numerous activities, including the annual sports event, ABSA Olympics, faculty prom night, undergraduate orientation, to name a few. In this age of modern technology and the ever-growing field of biotechnology, our intellectual capacity is essential. However, our soft skills are equally important. In fact, soft skills are more important than ever before, no matter whether you are a researcher, entrepreneur, patent agent, or writer after graduation. Therefore, ABSA has started this webinar series. All students, especially the ABSA members, will have an opportunity to organize a webinar as a part of the ABSA webinar series. Our ABSA webinar series aims to provide a platform for the students to develop and refine their various soft skills. For instance, leadership, teamwork, communication, interpersonal skills, event organization, and time management skills. These webinar series are really student-centric and helpful for involved students in developing and sharpening their soft skills. At the same time, these webinars are helpful to ABSA members and all participants to update themselves with the latest knowledge in the respective areas of webinar topics. I want to thank our honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Chanel. In fact, we are honored to host you. Thank you for accepting our invitation and becoming a part of our webinar series. Thank you, Professor M. Ravichandran, our Dean of Faculty of Applied Sciences, for the full support. I want to thank the organizing committees for doing a marvelous job. The efforts and time they committed to this webinar are appreciable. Last but not least, my special thanks to our ABSA advisor, Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash, for taking this initiative to start this student-centric webinar series. Despite his busy schedule, he has trained and guided my team members by spending lots of time and energy. Thank you, Dr. Subhash. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining us. Without further ado, Ms. Shatisha, over to you. Please lead the way.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vivian, for your wonderful welcoming remarks. Next, I'd like to invite the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Sciences, Senior Professor M. Ravichandran, to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Shatisha, and all the ABSA team members. In the weekend and just before the exam, and you can see that enthusiastically all the students are participating. I'd like to thank all the students for spending your very precious time before your exam, and you have that enthusiasm is there, means I think we really appreciate you. I can feel it that you enjoy doing it, and I'd like to thank Dr. Subhash for his time and spending it to making us a new way of creating, instilling the soft skill among the students. So not, I forgot our speaker. Thank you. Welcome to AIMST virtually, Dr. Sonil Bhagwat. And from though you are in UK and in a different time zone, 8 a.m. there, and here it's 4 p.m. So thank you so much for your valuable time, and so it is actually indeed a pleasure having you with us. And the title also very interesting: Connecting Culture, Food and Environment for Global Sustainability. So it is indeed a pleasure having you with us, and hopefully we'll see you once everything is fine and we all can meet each other. So I wish good luck to all my students for the examinations coming in a week time. So and also for the audience from all over the world, and all the team members, particularly the Vice President Vivian and Hugo, Satisha, Melanie, Prasad, and I wish I can read all of you, but I would like to convey my thank you and congratulations for consistently doing this ABSA webinar series. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor M. Ravichandran, for your inspiring opening remarks. Next, I'd like to call upon the Organizing Committee Chairman, Ms. Melanie Roberts, to say a few words and introduce the moderator of today's webinar. Ms. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, MC, Ms. Saitisha. Hello, everyone, and hello from Malaysia. I am Melanie Roberts, and I'm proud to tell you that I am a final year student of the BSc Biotechnology degree program of AIMST University. It was an honor to serve as chairman of the organizing committee of this webinar. On behalf of the AIMST Biotechnology Students Association and the organizing committee of this webinar, I welcome today's speaker, Professor Dr. Sonil Bhagwat, who is a professor of environment and development, as well as the head of the School of Social Sciences and Global Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the Open University UK, Dean of our Faculty of Applied Sciences, Senior Professor M. Ravichandran, AIMST Biotechnology Students Association Advisor, Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash, and all distinguished participants from various countries. This is the 7th webinar in our ABSA webinar series, organized by AIMST Biotechnology Students Association, and we are proud to host it. I want to thank Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat for accepting our invitation and becoming a part of our webinar series. I also want to thank the Dean of our Faculty of Applied Sciences, Senior Professor M. Ravichandran, for his support. As chairperson of this webinar's organizing committee, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our committed team who worked very hard to organize this webinar. Last, but certainly not least, I want to especially thank Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash. Our committee members feel very lucky to have him as advisor of the ABSA. On behalf of the ABSA and Webinar Organizing Committee, I want to thank Dr. Subhash for his guidance and molding us to play these roles. Ladies and gentlemen, before I pass the mic to the MC, I want to introduce the moderator of this webinar. In fact, it is my great pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's webinar. This webinar will be moderated by Mr. Hugo Koi Ping. Mr. Hugo is president of the AIMST University's Biotechnology Student Association. He has a considerable experience of delivering talks, and he is very vocal and popular in our association. Thank you, Mr. Hugo, for accepting our request to serve as the moderator of this webinar. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I welcome you all and thank you for joining us. Let's get ready to listen to the thoughts of our today's speaker. Without further ado, MC, Ms. Saitisha, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Mel. Now I request the moderator of today's webinar, Mr. Hugo, to introduce the speaker and start today's session. Mr. Hugo, please.
Thank you, MC, Ms. Saitisha. Hello, everyone. Wherever you are, I hope you are having a delightful day. I'm Hugo Koi Ping. I'm proud to tell you that I'm a Year 3 student of Biotechnology degree program of AIMST University. It is my great honor to serve as moderator for this webinar. I want to thank all participants for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, rapid advancement in science and technology have allowed us to enjoy a massive leap in life quality and longer life expectancy. Our computers are increasingly faster, more portable, and powerful than ever before. Undeniably, with all of these revolutions, technology has made our lives easier, faster, better, and more fun. However, as we all flourish and becoming more and more technologically advanced, did we forget something? How is our Mother Earth doing? The cradle of life that supports humans, animals, and other life forms from the dawn of life to this very day. Did we forget to take a good care of our planet? Can nature be sustained in this age of modern urbanization? Furthermore, what roles do our cultural values play in answering the questions I just mentioned? Today, in this webinar, we will have an excellent opportunity to learn more from the distinguished Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat about connecting culture, food, and the environment for global sustainability. We are lucky. Our speaker from the United Kingdom will talk on this vital and timely topic to share his thought with us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat. Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat is having very vast experience and lots of credentials. However, I'm going to highlight some important points to introduce him in brief. In 1998, means 23 years ago, Dr. Shonil Bhagwat completed his MSc at the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. In 2002, which means 19 years ago, Dr. Shonil Bhagwat completed his PhD at the same university, which is University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Then from 2003 to 2006, he served as a postdoc researcher at the Natural History Museum, London, United Kingdom. From 2006 to 2009, he served as a postdoc researcher at the University of Oxford, UK. Then he served at the University of Oxford from 2009 to 2013, and he directed an international and interdisciplinary master's program in biodiversity, conservation, and management at the School of Geography and the Environment at the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Then in February 2013, he joined the Open University as lecturer in geography, and currently is working as professor in the same university, I mean the Open University, UK. As Professor of Environment and Development, his research interests sit at a cross-section between natural and social sciences. His research focuses on the links between environment and development. In particular, his research engages critically with discussions on a variety of key environmental concerns, such as agriculture and food security, biodiversity conservation, climate change, ecosystem services, and sustainability. His research addresses perceived grand environmental challenges within the context of growing discussion on the Anthropocene or the age of humans. In a broader sense, his research is mainly focused on three wide-ranging themes, namely biocultural diversity studies, the resilience of agriculture and food systems, and geographies of the Anthropocene, with each team addressing a number of research questions. He is affiliated to many associations and professional bodies. He is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy of the United Kingdom. He is also a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society with the Institute of British Geographers, London. He is an active member of Peer Review College in Global Challenges Research Fund. He is also an adjunct fellow of Linacre College at Oxford. He has supervised and co-supervised several postgrad students, and so far he has published more than 147 papers in peer-reviewed journals, and his work is cited almost 6,000 times. With this very brief introduction, I'm going to invite speaker Professor Dr. Sonia Bhagwat. Just before I do so, a gentle reminder for all participants. If you have any questions to the speaker, please post them in the Zoom chat box so that the speaker can answer them during our Q&A session later. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Sonia Bhagwat to take control of the floor. Professor, please.
Thank you very much for that very kind and generous introduction and the excellent opening remarks and very elaborate opening remarks. Thank you all. I'm delighted to be talking at this seminar, and it's a pity that I can't be at your beautiful campus that is seen in the background, but this is a good substitute, I think. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute and get started. Can you see it okay?
Yes, looks good, sir.
Excellent.
Clear.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about connecting culture, food, and the environment for global sustainability. And the reason why I am focusing on food is because food is such an important aspect of our society. So the message that I want to send is that if we get the food right, then we will make good progress towards global sustainability. You would have heard the old adage that we are what we eat. And so I'm going to suggest that because we are what we eat, if we get it right with the food we eat, then global sustainability will be within our reach. Here is the challenge that is often cited. There will be 9 billion people on this planet by 2050. And to feed those 9 billion people, we will need 50% more food than we currently do. And so this challenge has driven a lot of discussion of food security and nutrition security around the world. To meet this challenge, there is a lot of interest in what the Green Revolution has done for us and can do for us. We are now starting to talk about the second Green Revolution, particularly in Africa, where agriculture is expanding quite rapidly. However, that intensification has increased food production, but it has also damaged environment alongside it. And that is a concern that is often expressed. So Has intensification solved the problems of food security? It hasn't. In fact, if you look at the current patterns, there are over 2 billion people in the world who are still in food insecure. Over half of them are in Asia, 675 million in Africa, and also in Latin America and the Caribbean, and particularly in the global north as well. So food insecurity is a global problem. And this is mind-boggling. One wonders why, despite technological advances in agriculture and growth in production of food, are these people, over 2 billion people, food insecure. So we ought to ask ourselves, has the Green Revolution worked for us? Has the focus on production been wise and useful? And I think I'm going to suggest that it is not, and that there is a three-way disconnect between food, culture, and the environment. And I'm going to explore this disconnect in this talk. There's disconnect between culture and food because traditional practices of agriculture are often regarded less well off, whereas commercial mass production of food is something that has become the norm. And so food and culture are disconnected. Food and environment are also disconnected because in the process of intensification of agriculture, we have made a huge impact on the environment and degraded it in the process. And there is disconnect between environment and culture as well, because in pursuit of techno fixes or technological solutions in growing more food for more people, we have the agriculture has become somewhat culturally insensitive, and we have left behind some of the cultural associations that are important when we think about food. I'm going to suggest that there are three scales of disconnect in this sphere. The first is landscapes, landscapes where we grow our food, where people live, work, and play, as it were. Species is the second level, and this is not just the crop species that we grow or animal species that we breed, but also the species that live in farming landscapes. And third, genes. And I'm sure you know more than I do, and you know it very well, that genes are very important in influencing how food is grown and why certain types of crops are high yielding and certain others not. So genes are also very important. So I'm going to suggest that there is this disconnect at three fundamental levels. So I'm going to call it a paradox because paradox is a situation that seems impossible to understand because it contains two opposite facts. So the first paradox I'm going to refer to is the landscape paradox, second, the species paradox, and third, the genes paradox. So landscape paradox is about industrial agriculture claiming vast landscapes, while more than 80% of farms are really small scale, smallholder farms. And these smallholder farms are able to grow food much more efficiently from a small land parcel, whereas industrial agriculture claims vast landscapes, and in the grand scheme of things, it is less efficient and it produces a poorer quality of food. So that is the landscape paradox. Second is the species paradox. And this is about dependence of the entire global food system on a very small number of species. And I will come to that in more detail. But essentially, a dozen or so species contribute more than 80% of food supply in the world and calorie intake in the world. On the other hand, a variety of food is essential for healthy and nutritious diets. So there is a massive contradiction right there. And the third is the genes paradox. We have pursued genetically modified organisms in order to produce more food and also fortify some of the food to make it more nutritious. On the other hand, there is already existing agrobiodiversity, which is the variety of genes and species that is found in agricultural systems around the world. So while we are trying to modify organisms and to produce more food through that mechanism, we are somewhat sidestepping or overlooking agrobiodiversity, the genetic diversity that already exists. And that is the third paradox. I'm going to suggest that we can resolve these three paradoxes if we connect food, culture, and the environment. And that will involve us embracing agrobiodiversity. It will involve us embracing multifunctional landscapes where food is grown, but also other human needs are fulfilled. It will involve reducing environmental harms from agriculture, and it will involve embracing cultural traditions that already exist. So with this, we can resolve the three paradoxes that I mentioned. So I will take each paradox in turn and use some of the case studies from my own work to illustrate how we can resolve these paradoxes. So resolving the landscape paradox. Now, if we treat agricultural landscapes as multifunctional, as they are, and as opposed to intensification of landscapes for food production alone, if we focus on other benefits, if we consider them in how we plan and manage land, then I think we can resolve the landscape paradox. Now I'm going to refer to culturally protected forests in tropical agricultural landscapes in particular, but also around the rest of the world. This is a landscape in South India, in the southern part of Karnataka state, in a small district called Kodagu, where I have done a number of years of field research. And you can see that there's the town of Virajpet that straddles along the picture. And interspersed with the buildings in the town, there is a lot of green vegetation. And that green vegetation is either coffee plantations or culturally protected forests. So even in a very fertile agricultural land that grows rice paddy, you can find these culturally protected forests. And one might wonder, what have forests got to do with agricultural landscapes? And I'm going to explain in a minute. So there are such forests around the world on every single continent, except of course Antarctica. And they are sometimes very small, a fraction of a hectare. Others can be quite large, hundreds of hectares. And there are a large number of them in some places, such as Kodagu that I mentioned before. So these forests are protected in fertile agricultural landscapes. This is another forest, small forest, a patch of forest in another South Indian landscape. You can see that the stark contrast between agricultural fields in the foreground and forest in the background. So these forests are important because they provide ecosystem services. These are benefits that people derive from the presence of trees and forests. These forests contribute to, for example, storing groundwater and therefore making it available in natural springs. These forests sequester carbon and therefore mitigate some of the damage that carbon emissions cause to the environment. These forests also host pollinators and that can help to pollinate crops. So these are examples of some of the benefits that we can derive from culturally protected forests. Obviously, there is no formal regulation, formal law often to protect these forests. And so cultural norms are very important. It is what the local communities decide as the norm. And often this is associated with a deity, a god or goddess, or any form of natural element that is worshipped by local people. And so these cultural norms are important to guide the protection of these forests. I'm going to talk at length about culturally protected forests in Ethiopia. This is a picture of a church forest in Ethiopia, in South Gondar district in northwestern Ethiopia. One of my students, Ashley Massey, carried out research on this particular landscape. You can see on the top right-hand side the aerial view of this forest. That little circle in the center is the rooftop of one of the Orthodox churches in Ethiopia. And surrounding this church is a large patch of forest, which is in stark contrast with brown agricultural landscape that you can see outside of that green zone. And so these forests are in stark contrast to the surrounding landscape. In a country like Ethiopia, where forests are in short supply, in some parts of Ethiopia, these are pretty much the last remaining patches of vegetation. And so Ashley Massey started to look at this and to see how beneficial are these forests to what people do on an everyday basis, that is agriculture and produce and grow food. So she created zones of pollination around each of these forests. So now the blue dots in the picture are church forests, and the circles, connected circles around the blue dots or the blue patches are pollination zones. This is based on how far pollinators such as honeybee could travel and therefore benefit the agricultural land around it. And if we zoom out, you can see that in South Gondar district, pollination zones cover a large proportion of agricultural landscape. And so in other words, if there were no pollinators or no church forests, then agricultural landscape will suffer badly, purely because of the withdrawal of this pollination service and therefore sudden drop in yield of what the agricultural land can produce. So removal of cultural norms can compromise ecosystem services. We looked at the pollination, but also carbon sequestration can be compromised, groundwater storage can be compromised, and a variety of other ecosystem services can be compromised if we remove those cultural norms. If we recognize, on the other hand, those cultural norms, then they can provide other benefits. This is another image of a forest, a sacred forest in Kodagu. You can see in the picture my collaborators, Professor C.G. Koshalappa from Forestry College and K.M. Nanaya, who now also works at the Forestry College. So these forests form an important part of cultural landscapes. This is an image of rice terraces in the Philippines. And these are cultural landscapes that are shaped by human and environmental factors collectively. And so if we recognize that all landscapes inherently are cultural, then I think we can resolve this landscape paradox that I talked about. Landscapes where cultural norms are upheld can produce food more sustainably without causing harms to the environment. So I'll move on to the second paradox, which is the species paradox. And I think we can resolve the species paradox if we acknowledge that there is a pool of species from which our food can potentially come from. If we diversify this pool of species, then we can resolve the species paradox. So there are something like 390,000 globally identified plant species. Over human history, we have used over 5,500 crops that have been used to produce food. Currently, only 3 crops, rice, maize, and wheat, provide 50% of world's calorie intake. And 12 crops, along with 5 animal species, provide 75% of the food that we consume in the world. So we are making use of a tiny fraction of potential number of species that could help us diversify the food supply and make it more nutritious. So on this backdrop, it's quite staggering that 75% of food comes from only 5 animals and 12 cereal grains, which I think makes our global food system very vulnerable, because if there is a sudden shock in a small number of these species, then it's not unlikely that a large proportion of global food supply will be wiped out before we know it. So this makes the food system less resilient. On the other hand, there are family farms around the world. In fact, 9 out of 10 farms around the world are family farms. 80% of world food supply comes from these farms. And these farms also support agrobiodiversity, the diversity of species and varieties and breeds and cultivars that are used traditionally over generations for food and agriculture. So this is an image of a farm from Carinthia in southern Austria in Europe. Now, what does this agrobiodiversity consist of? Let's take the example of lactobacillus that is found in yogurts and cheeses. It makes a variety of different cheeses and varieties of yogurt products. Thai jasmine rice, known for its taste and fragrance. Aberdeen Angus cattle, again known for their beneficial properties. And shiitake mushroom, which is a delicacy in some of the East Asian cuisines. And so these are all elements of agrobiodiversity that current foods that are not really mainstream in current food system. Now, one of my interests is invasive plants, and I'm going to take this argument further by suggesting that, in fact, invasive plants that are seen as causing environmental problems can, in fact, also be used to diversify our food supply, and they could be considered as part of this agrobiodiversity. So in the UK, there are a wide range of invasive plants introduced over time. And one of them is Japanese knotweed, which is dreaded by landowners because if it's found on your property, then it's impossible to buy or sell that property. So Japanese knotweed is frowned upon. However, in many parts of the world, Japanese knotweed is used in food. So this is a recipe of Japanese knotweed that is commonly used. And so potentially there are edible uses of a very annoying or invasive plant. Some gourmet cuisines have also explored the use of invasive species. The image that you can see here is wild boar carnitas tacos with charred tomatillo and radish and cilantro onion salsa. There are many other experiments that have been done with invasive species, such as land snail kebabs or green crab fritters or beer battered lionfish. And so there is potential even in gourmet cuisine to explore the uses of invasive species. And this is another example of invasive species cuisine where invasive snail is used in food. So collectively, we can call this frontier food, food that we perhaps are not often comfortable with, that we don't quite see as palatable, but could potentially provide the protein requirements and nutrition requirements of a large population of the world. And so this frontier food, if we make that part of our food system, then I think we have the chance of resolving the species paradox. And so a more sustainable food system will not be dependent on a small number of species, but it will diversify where and when possible. The third paradox is the genes paradox, and I have some suggestions about resolving this paradox as well. I am conscious that I'm talking to biotechnology experts, and I'm not an expert in biotechnology, but I have some knowledge of agrobiodiversity, and I'm going to propose and make some suggestions based on that knowledge. So genetic variability and diversity that already exists needs to be recognized before we apply technological solutions, sometimes called technofixes, to increasing global food production or fortifying food or making it suitable for lands where it's difficult to produce. So I think this agrobiodiversity needs to be considered much more strongly in biotechnology. So here you can see the image of varieties of corn in Peru. There's something like 55 varieties of corn, and you can see the splendor of color and pattern and shapes and sizes and textures in just one species alone. And there is agrobiodiversity of pretty much all the vegetable and fruit species and crops that we consume. So there's a lot of potential there. Now I'm going to move on to a study of cotton, genetically modified cotton that I carried out in central India. And you might have read or heard that genetically modified cotton was held responsible for some of the tragic suicides by farmers in central India because the investments that they made didn't yield good returns, and the entire crops were lost as because there wasn't either the land wasn't suitable, the irrigation wasn't there, and so the farmers who were distraught by their failure committed suicides, and this became a very prevalent phenomenon in central India, with governments taking notice of this. Now, central Indian plains are known for their black cotton soil. So this is the land of cotton, as it were. There are local varieties, traditional varieties of cotton that are grown. And yet, genetically modified cotton was introduced, which was dependent on a high input of irrigation, whereas traditionally cotton is grown as a cash crop with other food crops, therefore offering a more balanced agricultural landholding. But with genetically modified cotton, farmers had to put up front a large sum of money in order to purchase the seeds and to cultivate the land. And many farmers therefore became entirely reliant on cotton. So their traditional practices of agriculture were phased out as a result of the introduction of GM cotton. Now, cotton is a crop that requires a lot of water. It's really thirsty. And genetically modified cotton does very well with irrigation. It can multiply yields very quickly. So that's seen as a success of biotechnology, if you like. However, for farms that are water starved, it's often not practical. And that is the reason why the farmers suffered very poor yields despite having invested in genetically modified cotton seeds. Now, what we found was that root system is really the crux of the problem. Genetically modified cotton is made for high yielding properties, but it has very shallow root system. Whereas traditional varieties of cotton, sometimes called tree cotton, have deeper root systems. And so they are better adapted to growing in water-starved and water-poor conditions. And so this tree cotton is already part of local agrobiodiversity. But in the rush for genetically modified cotton, farmers forgot this agrobiodiversity that existed in their own fields and farms. So I think there's a lesson for genetic modification. Rather than high yielding traits for its own sake, genetic modification could perhaps look at the needs and the traits that are beneficial to farmers, depending on the conditions where these crops are grown. We could perhaps approach biotechnology that is used in genetic modification as a social enterprise, and therefore seek the input from farmers in what traits are desirable, what traits are beneficial, rather than being driven by commercially savvy traits that lead to profits, but they often make the farmers suffer. And so if genetic modification was approached as a social enterprise, if it became more socially sustainable, could it perhaps prevent farmer suicides and the miseries that the failures of cotton crop cause farmers in central India? That's a question that I will leave you to really reflect over. So my hunch is that if genetic modification served farmers' need rather than industry's needs, and if it embraced agrobiodiversity that already exists, then I think we can solve this so-called genes paradox that I described. So I think sustainable agriculture will benefit from biotechnology, no doubt, but I think biotechnology also needs to take notice of agrobiodiversity and the genetic diversity that already exists and that we can potentially benefit from. So rounding things up and drawing to conclusions, I'm going to suggest that if we connect culture, food, and the environment, then we have a decent chance of making some progress towards global sustainability. So connecting food, culture, and the environment is really the message that is coming here. If we approach biotechnology as a social enterprise, if we recognize agrobiodiversity, then I think we'll make a good progress towards global sustainability. If we look at a variety of different cuisines, if we experiment with frontier food, then also that can support some of the ambitions of providing nutritious and adequate food for a large proportion of the world's population, and to really address that problem of 2 billion people in the world being food insecure. If we approach agricultural landscapes as multifunctional that offer a wide range of environmental benefits, then we will make some progress towards global sustainability. And if we embrace cultural traditions that potentially offer additional benefits, the ecosystem services to agriculture, then I think we will also make good progress towards sustainability. Now I'm going to conclude by suggesting something based on these three monkeys that Mahatma Gandhi is often associated with. These three monkeys really send a message that hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. I'm going to suggest that culture, food, and the environment are in fact opposite of the evil. They are all really good things. If we got them to speak to each other, if the culture, food, and the environment spoke, heard, and seen each other, then we can make a good progress towards global sustainability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dr. Shonya Bhagwat. Thank you for the excellent talk. So now we shall proceed to the Q&A session. I want to invite the audience to ask questions and to clear their doubts. So the questions can be asked either by submitting it through the Zoom chat box or by unmuting yourself. While waiting for participants, I have a question for you, Professor. Yeah, it's from our registration form. So how can we contribute to improve the status quo of the food sustainability in our daily life?
That is a really good question. I would suggest making small changes to what we eat and how we eat. For example, January, the month that we are in, is considered Veganuary in many parts of the world, which means that after the celebrations in December and the festive occasions where we consume a lot of meat, if we treat January as a month where we reduce consumption of meat, then we can make a contribution towards global sustainability. So small changes in our everyday lives could make a difference. For example, some colleges in Oxford have declared Mondays as meat-free days. And so the college refectories only offer vegetarian meals on Mondays. And this meat-free Mondays is something that is also practiced around the world. So I think if we make small changes in what we eat, how we eat, and when we eat, then we can make our own consumption more sustainable, and we can ensure a slightly lower impact of our consumption on the planet.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And next on, we have another question here. So it's also from the registration form. So it's about crop production. So recently, so is there how does pollution affect crop production? To tie with this title today.
Right. Sorry. Do you mind repeating the question? Is it about production of?
How does as you can see, we are in a modern age of urbanization. So this process happening everywhere. So how does this urban population? Sorry, how does this urban pollution affect crop production or agriculture activity? Yeah.
Right. Urban pollution. Yeah. That's an interesting question, and I am no expert in pollution really, but I know that some of my colleagues have worked on this, and fields or agricultural landscapes which are not far from the roads and industrial settings you can see accumulation of harmful chemicals in crops. As the crops grow, the pollution in the environment can affect the, the quality of crops by simply because accumulation of heavy metals, for example, in the crops. So I think that's the connection between pollution and crops. I think if the question is about urban population and its growing demands on food, then yes, I think urban consumerism is really a big challenge, and the growth in urban environments means that we have a larger number of people dependent on agricultural land. They have larger footprints. So even if we concentrate population in a small urban setup, they still have a footprint on the land that goes beyond the limits of that city. And so concentration of urban populations doesn't necessarily mean a reduction on our footprint on the environment. Sometimes it means it leads to, in fact, greater footprint and greater consumption. Because by design, urban environments are not suitable to grow food. However, there are experiments that I am familiar with. And so in New York City, for example, one of the busiest cities in the world, there's a group who is cultivating or undertaking farming on rooftops on big sky risers. And so even in cities, it's possible to grow food if we design them in a different way than we currently do. And that can contribute towards global sustainability.
I see, Prof. Thank you. And let's look at the chart.
Yeah, I can see a
There is
question about...
one question from the participants. One of the participants, how can we support cultural diversity?
Yeah, sure. I think cultural diversity already exists. And if we are aware of cultural diversity, if we acknowledge cultural diversity, if we put the mechanisms and policies in place to support cultural diversity, then I think it will be well supported. So for example, in Kodagu, the region that I mentioned in my talk, when I arrived there first to carry out research on sacred forests in late 90s, sacred forests were obviously very common, but the awareness of sacred forests wasn't very high. And so people simply walked past them, drove past them without recognizing that this is actually a sacred forest. However, since 2000, a lot of people have become interested in this region to recognize sacred forests, and they are in fact very proud of their tradition and culture. And I think part of the reason is that the local researchers in the Forestry College are very influential and very vocal about the importance of sacred forests for provision of ecosystem services, for example. And this is a really important message for the farmers that if you protect sacred forests, then actually it can benefit your core occupation, which is agriculture and food. And so I think cultural diversity can be supported by making the links between culture and food and possibly the environment, our other concerns that are at the top of the mind, if you like.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for the explanation.
Okay, I can see another question pop up here about sacred forests existing throughout the world. Besides India, yes, that's correct. And if you remember, I showed a map of sacred forests around the world, and they exist in all of the continents inhabited by humans, except of course Antarctica. And I think they come in various shapes and sizes. Some landscapes are very rich with sacred forests. In other landscapes, they are vast and expansive. So I think they are prominent parts of the landscape around the world. And we did a back of the envelope calculation about how much land is really covered in lands that are sacred or are protected for cultural, religious, spiritual purposes. And it could be up to 15% of Earth's land surface that could be protected under this cultural, religious, or spiritual values. And so it's quite an important part of our everyday lived in landscapes that we often don't recognize, but I think we should recognize.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yeah, I can see another question. How can we solve open burning issue, especially for the farmers, those who work on paddy? Yeah. So I think open burning is a part of some of the cultural traditions, and open burning also returns the nutrients back to the soil. And so that is a practice that is very common. What often happens is that accidental fires that are set by open burning can damage vast stretches of landscape. And that's where I think more regulation needs to come in. And the fire really needs to be contained within the field where it is set, rather than spreading in the wider landscape. And so I think farmers being vigilant of fire spreading and being able to contain the fire within their own land is something that can work for supporting the open burning practice, and rather than seeing it as a taboo or cracking down on that practice. Because ultimately the farmers do it because it returns some of the nutrients back to the soil, and where farmers don't have access to agrochemicals or fertilizers, that return of nutrients to soils is really important for farming.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I hope that answered the question. All right. Next on. Well, before closing this Q&A session, I just want to check. So we have many participants from many different countries. If you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hugo, can I ask the question?
Yes, please, Dr. Subhash.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Shonil. Your talk was wonderful. I think a few couple of questions I have, and I have some comments also, So my first question, Dr. Shonil, you are in Europe, and Europe is reluctant to accept the GMOs, So, and there is one school of thought, if the Europe accepts the GMOs, the prices of the food commodities can go down, and Europe should take the advantage of this GM technology. So, from your perspective, what do you think, why Europe is reluctant to accept the GMOs?
Yeah, good question. I think there are wider societal issues there. So part of it is, I think, lack of transparency in how genetic modification really affects the quality of food or the nutritional value of food. So that's one issue, the health effects of GMOs. And there are lots of myths around that. Which some of them are true, some of them are not. But I think the concern around effect of GMOs on health, particularly if we bring GMOs into food, is something that is at the front of many people's mind. The second issue is, I think, more, I guess, it's the issue of, a political issue, because GMOs are often controlled by large companies, large corporations who have commercial interests in GMOs. And that doesn't often sit well with small producers, small farmers who are somewhat tied to GMOs if they invest in them, and find it very difficult to move away from GMOs. So I think that's the second concern. So the health concern and the political concern is something that is driving slight reluctance and resistance towards GMOs in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shonil. So my another question is, because the Sustainable Development Goals, those are accepted by the global community. So the goal number 15 is about to prevent the loss of the biodiversity. So since you are working in this area, so it will be great if you can elaborate how the global community is dealing with to prevent the loss of the biodiversity globally.
Yeah, sure. So with biodiversity, there are two very contrasting schools of thought. One is the approach where people are advocating setting aside large protected areas or reserves to protect biodiversity. And the second school of thought suggests that, in fact, if setting aside large protected areas isn't going to save large number of species, what we need to do is to embed biodiversity in our everyday landscapes, and therefore make landscapes more multifunctional, more supportive of biodiversity. And I think a combination of these two will work well with protection of biodiversity, because biodiversity ultimately is not just about a large charismatic megafauna, such as elephants and tigers and leopards, but biodiversity is also about things that are invisible, insects that are not as prominent as the charismatic megafauna, or at least some of the insects, or fungi, for example, or lichens. And I think these are also important elements of biodiversity, the unseen biodiversity, if you like. So I think if we are to protect biodiversity effectively and successfully, then we need a sort of multi-pronged approach, which not only embraces multifunctionality and multiple benefits from landscapes, but also sets aside reserves, whether large or small, in areas where they are needed. So a combination of the two can serve well to protect global biodiversity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shonil. So one more question I have is, because as you mentioned, by 2050, world population will be 9 billion. Some of the reports says it may be 9.7 billion. And around 70% increase we have to do in agriculture productivity to make sure that everybody will get the food. And but at the same time, I mean, every day, the rate of the deforestation, clearing the fragmented forest, as well as developments in developing countries as well as underdeveloped countries, because they, they have the limited financial resources. So as a result of that one, they have a choice. So as a result of that one, to pay the debt of rich countries, they can allow them to cut the forest and take the timber, blah, blah, something like this. So in order to achieve the sustainability day by day, we are losing more forests. So from that perspective, do you think global community is doing enough to take care of the problems and helping the developing countries and underdeveloped countries?
Yes, I think a straight answer to your question is no, because this is to do with global disparities in resource access. The developed countries are obviously demanding more resources. And because these resources cannot be produced in their own countries, they are looking elsewhere to import those resources from. So if you look at the development of commercial agriculture in recent years in Africa, for example, a lot of the land investments have come from other countries, not African countries, and a lot of the food or horticultural crops or agricultural crops that are grown are exported out of Africa. So I think this is a huge challenge for making Africa food secure, for example. And I think that is a dilemma that many countries face on this trajectory of development. On the one hand, they want to encourage foreign direct investment, including in agriculture. On the other hand, if that happens, then often food security of their own populations is compromised. And so I think that balance needs to be struck. I think the countries in the global north need to become more aware of their unintended consequences of their consumption patterns, of the demands that it places on natural resources in countries in the global south. And so I think that recognition and that awareness needs to drive how landscapes are planned and designed and resources extracted. So yes, I think deforestation, part of it, even though it is driven by local actors, the reasons why it is driven lie elsewhere. It's the demand from the global north often that drives the deforestation. So I think we need to make those connections between consumption in the global north and the unintended consequences that has on the landscapes in the global south.
Okay. Hugo, can I ask, do we have time, Hugo?
Yes, we still have a little time.
Okay, thank you very much, Hugo. Dr. Shonil, another question I have, because now you know the global pandemic COVID-19. So from that perspective, I have one question, because you are expert in studying the biodiversity and all these issues. So what do you think, because it is assumed that this coronavirus jumped from the bats and came to the human population, and one of the reason, as biotechnologist, I can see disturbed ecosystem or loss of biodiversity. So from that perspective, can you share with us your thoughts how it is important to protect the biodiversity from that perspective? Because COVID-19, it's considered its impact of we disturb the ecosystems and biodiversity. From that perspective, maybe you can shed some light to your thoughts.
That's right. I think COVID-19 has really triggered a lot of those connections that were not obvious before. So the connection between wildlife trade or consumption of wild game and wild meat and its connection with infectious diseases and possibly even pandemics wasn't as obvious until COVID-19 struck. And I think that realization is important. There is obviously, we need to do more research on it. We don't know the exact source of the virus, but it's not inconceivable that a virus like this can jump from species, particularly where the conditions, such as in the wet markets, as they call it in Wuhan, where possibly suitable for breeding this virus. Just as the current variants of SARS-CoV-2 have shown that they have arisen in densely populated places including in the southeast of England. And so I think if the conditions for that virus are right, then the virus can sort of evolve and spread. And so I think the argument that some people are putting forward is that if we make the conditions not right for the virus by not destroying the natural environment, not consuming wild meat, then I think we can prevent future pandemics such as this. So I think those connections are very important. They need to be further investigated. But I am really pleased that we are starting to think in those terms, because we really need to. The planet is a connected place, and something that happens in one corner of the planet can have unintended effects in another corner of the planet. And this pandemic has really highlighted those global connections.
Yeah. Thank you. So from the students' perspective, I think, Hugo, are there any questions in the chat room? Maybe you can check. If there is time, then I have a couple of questions, but maybe you can see questions.
Yes, so Professor, there's one question coming up from the chat box. So Professor, you mentioned that forests or vegetation are little or non-existent in areas with extreme weather conditions, such as Antarctica or Arctic. So is it possible through genetic manipulation, like insertion of frost-resistant genes from psychrophilic microbes, that certain crops cultivars made possible for long-term cultivation, as well as making use of these lands that are deemed wastelands with regards to land utilization options?
Yeah, interesting question. I think I can see the motivation for this question. And my response would be that perhaps we should look at already existing diversity and take cues from nature about what can and cannot work. So I'm not sure if very extreme weather conditions such as high Arctic or Antarctic, we can actually get past the ice cover and cultivate crops there. So there's a sort of physical barrier of ice that we need to confront with if we were to make Arctic or Antarctic green. And I don't think that is going to be possible. But nevertheless, in Arctic lands, when in the summer months, when the ice cover drops, there are plant species that grow there. They have their own strategies of adapting to the natural environment where they grow. So if this question is from a sort of biotechnology perspective, then my answer would be that we should really take cues from nature about what can or cannot work in an environment like extreme Arctic or Antarctic, and essentially see what is a workable solution in those environments.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And now, because of time limitation, we'll take a last one question.
Hugo, I will just take this opportunity to ask question.
Sure, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, Shonil, because majority of the participants are biotechnology and bioinformatics students. So from that perspective, from students' perspective, I'm asking this question. So US is an open university, and students works with a flexible time at their own location or in one country. So if some of the students are interested to come for the summer training or industrial training, so how you handle the requests?
I guess on case-by-case basis. So Open University has labs like any other university, and there are academics working on specific projects. So I think if there's a match between the interns' interests and the lab's core expertise, then I am sure that match can be made. I think it will, it's really done on a case-by-case basis. Having said that, Open University also has an innovative project called Open STEM Labs. And so this is where students, primarily based in the UK, can run experiments remotely. I don't know if it will be possible to do that in the specific topic in biotechnology, but there are experiments in physics or chemistry, for example, that Open STEM labs can run remotely. This is really for educational purpose more than research, but just want to highlight that there is a sort of experimentation and innovation going on in being able to carry out lab work remotely in some subjects at the Open University.
Yeah, thank you. So last question is in case of the, career, because now everybody is talking about the environmental biotechnology, or environment is going to be the bright, will have a bright future for career, as well as biodiversity. So from that perspective, you want to highlight, any advice for our students in sense of making a decision for making career, your thoughts, maybe you can share.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I think it's an exciting field. There is growing interest in environmental sustainability and possible technological solutions that can help environmental sustainability. So I think there are career opportunities, and if you are looking at postgraduate studies in this, there are courses in the UK, in the USA, and a variety of different universities are offering courses in this. And if you are interested in PhD programs, I am sure they are also quite common around the world in environmental sustainability and biotechnology.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just I just want to add the comment. So far, I was only aware of 3 monkeys associated with Mahatma Gandhi. So the analogy which you have used at the end, I think Shonil, that one needs to be promoted. It's a very good concept, and I loved it. So I want to thank you for sharing that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Hugo, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right. Thank you, Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat, for answering participants' questions. It was a really awe-inspiring session. Before I pass the mic back to the MC, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee for giving me this chance to serve as moderator. This was my very first time in life to serve as moderator, and this experience has helped me to learn a lot. I'm just 22 years old. As a student, it was a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed the role of moderator. I must thank Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash for providing these opportunities through webinar series. And furthermore, I want to thank him for the guidance and for being with my ABSA team and organizing committee through thick and thin. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you everyone. MC, Ms. Saitisha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat, for a very informative and insightful talk. Also, thank you very much, Mr. Hugo, for moderating today's session. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Parshat to deliver a word of thanks.
Thank you, MC, Ms. Saitisha. A very good day to everyone. My name is Parshat Govindasamy. I am proud to tell you that I am a Year 3 Bioinformatics student of AIMST University. I am very grateful that the organizing committee has given me this wonderful opportunity. First of all, on behalf of the AIMST Biotechnology Students Association and Webinar Organizing Committee, I want to thank Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat for a very enlightening and informative talk on connecting culture, food, and the environment for global sustainability. Professor Dr. Shonil Bhagwat, we are extremely grateful for the time as well as the effort you took to share your thoughts with us. We do really appreciate it. I would also like to thank our Dean of Faculty of Applied Sciences, Senior Professor M. Ravichandran, for his support. I also wish to thank Mr. Hugo, our President of ABSA, for moderating this session. Thanks to Ms. Vivian, our Vice President of ABSA, for her help in facilitating tasks of the organizing committee. I believe that this webinar definitely helped you to get some insights and learn something new about connecting culture, food, and the environment for global sustainability. I would like to take this opportunity to record my thanks to all members of the webinar organizing committee for their hard efforts and dedication in ensuring that this webinar runs smoothly without a hitch. As students, working together as a team for this webinar was indeed a really engaging and enjoyable experience. I am sure that all members of the webinar organizing committee feel the same way. Most importantly, I want to thank all the participants from various countries around the world for attending this webinar. Last, but certainly not least, on behalf of ABSA and Webinar Organizing Committee, I want to record my heartfelt thanks to our ABSA advisor, Senior Associate Professor Dr. Subhash, for his valuable efforts in creating these wonderful opportunities for us. As students, we are learning a lot of things through this webinar organizing exercise. Dr. Subhash, sincerely, we highly appreciate your efforts. I missed one thing to mention. I want to thank the Faculty of Applied Sciences and AIMST University Management for their support. We are running the whole show online and there are no problems with internet connectivity. Thanks to AIMST University for supporting the AIMST Biotechnology Students Association. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you. Ms. Saitisha, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Parshat. It was a great session today. Before ending the session, we would like to hear your feedback from all the participants by scanning the code on the screen right. We promise this evaluation survey will not take you more than 2 minutes. Your feedback will be greatly appreciated. You can either scan the QR code or go to the link shown below. The link will be posted in the chat box as well. After the completion of the survey, you will receive an instant participation certificate in a short while. And I'll keep this slide running for 2 more minutes for you to scan the QR code. All right, I hope everybody had the chance to scan the QR code and to provide feedback, also to download the speaker's presentation. Now, the organizing committee would like to take a picture of this event. We would love for everyone to switch their camera on to be in the picture.
Smile, please, organizing committee. One more time. Smile, please. Okay, Satisha, go ahead.
All right, thank you. And before I end today's session, there is an announcement from the AIMST Biotechnology Students Association. Since the final exams are around the corner, we will resume our webinars at the end of March or early April. We are really looking forward to having all of you joining us again in the next session. Thank you once again, everyone, and we wish you good health and safety. See you soon in our next webinar. Stay safe and have a wonderful day. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, guys.